As a web developer, you should have a blog for 3 reasons. The first is that we learn by building things. So in this video today, we're going to use Next.js, MDX, static site generation to build out a blog. And if that's the only thing you get from this video, mission accomplished. But the other 2 reasons are that you also learn by sharing your knowledge with other developers. So once you have a blog, you can write articles for it and share what you're learning with the world, which only benefits you as well. And lastly, it helps your career. To have a presence out on the internet, to be sharing your knowledge and showing the world and your future employers what you're learning will only help you when you apply to the next job. So to get started in this video, we've got this website right here that's just saying the word articles right now. And we're going to start with the homepage. And on this homepage, we want to show a list of the blog posts. So we're on the homepage, so we'll go to Pages Index. And here's where we want to show a list of all the articles. And the articles that we're going to be listing come from Markdown files that we're just going to commit into this same repository. So inside of the posts folder, I've got 2 that I just copied over from my website, and we'll go take a look at one. Now notice that they're not MD, they're MDX, and that's Markdown, which allows you to embed things like React components. So we'll be looking today at this one here, YouTube. It basically is a little component that allows me to pass in the ID of a video, and it will just render out a YouTube video in this article. We're not going to write the actual YouTube component today, but this is what it looks like. It's just a div that has an iframe inside that embeds the ID and the URL, and it will show up nice. So this is sort of the advantage of MDX. You can create a bunch of these little reusable components and embed them in your article. You can also use built-in ones like the image component that comes from Next.js, and we'll also take a look at that. So in this Markdown file, we also have something at the top called front matter. This is basically metadata about our article. Things like title, what tags does it have, when was it written, what's the excerpt that should show up, and then below that we have the actual Markdown itself. So let's close this for a second. We'll go back to the home page. And we want to work on basically getting a list of all of these articles to show their title, the tags, and excerpt. And this is going to take a few steps because we need to basically read in all of these files. We need to extract the data. So we're going to be doing some mapping over files, and hopefully it'll be interesting. So what we're going to do right here is we're going to export an async function, get static props. So we're doing this as a static function, which is server-side generation. Basically at build time when you deploy, it will go find all of the files and build out the data statically, because the blog posts are only ever going to change when we commit and push code. So we can improve performance by sort of doing the work ahead of time. So what we want to do here is basically get some posts. So we'll say get all posts, which is a function that doesn't yet exist, but we're going to be grabbing it from SRC API. So why is it at SRC API? Well, in TypeScript, you can sort of provide some like paths so that you can just refer to them by at SRC instead of having to know like ... what level am I at? How many dots do I put there? So I set these up, and that will point to SRC API. And we are going to be working on a function called getAllPosts. So export const getAllPosts is going to be equal to an arrow function. And in here we need to do the work of getting all of the posts. But the first thing we're going to do is actually try to load all of the slugs. And the slug is just sort of this part of the file name. Reduce SWR, and this is what will end up being the URL in our browser. So we're going to do that as a separate function here. Export const get slugs, and this will be an arrow function that will take in nothing, and it will return an array of strings. So just like that. I think that's how you define an array of strings. Yes. Cool. So to actually read all of these files and get these slugs, we're going to be using something called glob, which is basically you pass it a pattern. So in this case, like star.mdx, it will go and it will find all of the files that match those patterns and give them to you. So we're going to say const paths is equal to sync, which is this function I imported from glob. And here's where we need to tell it basically where to look. And because in a couple places we're going to use sort of the path to these posts, we're going to come up here and we're going to say posts path is equal to a couple parts of a path joined together. The first one will be wherever this process is running from, the current working directory, and then /posts. So with that here, we can embed that into this string here. So posts path, and then we're going to look for star.mdx. And I just want to console.log and see what these look like. But remember, this code's not being called yet. So we'll say get slugs, just like this. And we'll make TypeScript happy for now. We'll just return an empty array to make it all nice and non-red. And we'll come back to the website and we got an error. Okay, so your getStaticProps function did not return an object. All right, let's go fix that. So this function getStaticProps, it needs to return an object that has the props that will be passed into this function here. So I think it should work now. Let's go see what it output. And it output this data. So why don't I paste this above? So this is what we've got working with now, but really what we want is just this reduce. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm basically going to split on the slash, and then we'll get the last part of it. And then I'm going to split that part on the period, and then just get the actual file name, not the extension. So what we can do is we're going to return the paths, and we're going to map them one at a time where we have the path. And what I want to do is take the path and get, let's call it the parts. So we'll say path.split on a slash. And then I want to get the last part. So we'll call that the file name. And we'll say parts at parts.length -1. Just like that. And now with the file name, I want to basically break this into two parts. So we'll say we have the slug and the extension that we don't need, and that's why I put it with an underscore. So we'll say file name.split on the period, and then we can return the slug. So I don't need this sort of bogus return statement down here. And if we wanted to, we could console.log this out and see what we're working with so far. So we'll refresh the page, go to the terminal, and now we've got reduce and SWR. Now these will end up being the different slugs that show up in the URL when we're looking at each article. But sort of the next step we need to do, and I'll get rid of the console.log in case it's, I don't know, a little bit confusing. Why don't we put them inside of a variable called posts? With each slug, we basically want to go and load the information from the file itself and parse it all out to get the metadata, to get the actual content of the article. And that's what we're going to be working on next. So we're going to take the slugs and we're going to map them again. So as we map them, we'll get each slug. And we want to create a function called getPostFromSlug. GetPostFromSlug. Given a slug, it will go grab the post and all of its corresponding metadata. So we'll create this right here, export const getPostFromSlug. So we take in a slug, which is a string, and what we want to return is a post, just like this. And if TypeScript's new to you, don't worry, it's just basically giving a little bit more information to the compiler so it can basically tell me when I'm screwing up. If I mess up something like right now, it's saying, hey, you used post, you didn't define it. It will help me not mess up as I'm trying to code all this for the video. So we're going to define an interface of post. And what fields will this interface of post have? It's going to have content, which is a string. So that is sort of everything from here below. And then this here we're going to create as basically metadata. So we're going to say meta is post meta like that. Now that doesn't exist, so we need to say interface post meta, and each sort of metadata for a post will have an excerpt, which will be a string. We'll have a slug, which is also a string. We'll have a title, a string. We'll have tags, finally something different. We'll have an array of strings, and then we'll have a date, which we'll just return as a string as well. So strings all around. Save that. What's the error now? Basically, a function whose declared type is neither void. So basically it's saying, hey, you told me you're going to return a post. You did not return a post. So you got to go sort your function out. So what we want to first do is, why don't we get sort of where we think this post lives? So we'll create a variable called post path. And what we'll do is we'll take path and we'll join together some parts. So we're going to reuse this posts path. And then we're going to join that together with basically the slug.mdx, which is what the file should be named. So why don't we console.log that out? Let's make sure it's working. Just like that. Reload, come here. Here's the path where we should be finding the files. So you may be thinking, Lee, you just sort of redid everything you did above. Yes, that's true, but the cool thing about this function is that you can just pass it a slug and it will go grab you all of the information. And that will be useful later on when a person visits like /swr or posts /swr. We can just easily go and load all the information for that post. So with the path figured out, we want to read in the contents. We'll call them the source. So source like this. And we're going to use fs. Now path and fs, they are both coming from Node. Remember, this is server-side code, so we can use Node functions like path and fs. And on fs, we're going to be using something called read file sync, which does it synchronously. And we'll pass in a post path, and we should have the source here. So we console.log that out. We should have, well, we have a buffer, but it represents the contents of the file. There's a way to convert a buffer to a string. I don't know how without looking up, and I don't want to look it up right now. So we're just going to hope it works and use that source to basically extract two things. The first will be the content, and content is basically everything below the front matter, so here down. And then it's also going to give us the data, which will basically be the front matter data. So there's a tool called gray matter that does this sort of parsing for us. It gives us a function called matter, and we're going to call matter with the source and come back from that. Why don't we just take a look at the content and data? We should have, perfect. So there's our markdown. And then just down here, we have the data. This is all of the front matter data. So our title, our tags, our date, and the excerpt. So now that we basically have everything, what I want to do is return an object where for the most part we're just going to be returning exactly what we have here. But I'm going to put this into an object called meta. And in meta, a couple things I want, which is basically this data here. So we want the excerpt. So the excerpt will come from data, just like that. Next we have the slug. So slug is actually here, so we don't have to do anything special for it. Why don't we put it first, because it requires the least special. And we're still missing the title, so we'll say data.title. But let's say for whatever reason you didn't define a title here, we'll just use the slug so that we can sort of guarantee, we'll guarantee an excerpt as well as an empty string, just to keep our type happy. Oops, I didn't want the string slug, I want the variable slug. Okay, so after the title, we want the tags. So we'll say tags is equal to data.tags, and we want to sort them so that they're in alphabetical order. But let's say they forgot to provide us any tags. So what we'll do is we'll use nullish coalescing from TypeScript. So basically like, if this isn't here, use this empty array instead and then sort them. And then the last thing we need to return is the date. And we'll say here again, just in case they forget to add the date, what we want to use is data.date or new date. And I want to convert that to a string, just like that. Cool. So we just did a lot of coding to get all of the post data from a given slug. It's returning all of this data here that we've typed out correctly. And remember here, I'm actually importing this post meta type. So I want to add an export here so that it can import that and it seems happy. Cool. So we're still working on get all posts. We've done a lot of work to get all the slugs. Now we're mapping each slug to the actual post data. But let's say we want to sort them and sort of put the newest post at the top and sort of go down in sort of, what is that, ascending order, I guess you could say, or is that descending? Descending, newest at the top. Anyways, we're going to sort them. So we're going to call a sort function, and sort is a function you pass in that receives sort of one post and another post, and we have to do some work to compare post A to post B to tell it which one is newer or older, or which way to sort them. So what we're going to say is if A, its meta and its date is greater than B meta date, then we return +1. So if A.meta.date is less than B.meta.date, we return -1. And if they're the same, we return 0. So I'm just going to save that. We've sorted them out, but this puts it in ascending order. So oldest at the top, then newest at the bottom. We want to reverse that. So we'll just add reverse here on the end. And we can now return posts, just like that. So with this function done, I should be able to come back here and let's take a look at the posts. See what we got that we're working with. Okay, so we've got basically the same data here, but we should have an array of them. It's sort of hard to tell. Yeah, there we go. So there's one article, there's another here. Each article has metadata that we're working with. Perfect. So now that we have the posts, we want to pass that information to our component so that we can render them out and show them on the screen. So what I want to do first though is we don't want too many posts on the home page. So why don't we use slice to basically just get the first 9 or the latest 9 posts. So we're going to slice that. And I actually don't need all of the content on the home page. Let's just get the metadata of each post. So we're going to map it, and we're going to take the post, and we're going to return the post's metadata. So I'm calling this posts, but it's sort of a lie. You can see here it's actually an array of post metadata. But what would you call this? Post metas? I don't know. We're just going to go with posts. And now that we have that, we want to pass these posts as props to our component. So what we can do is we can just put posts here. And that allows us to come up here and receive the posts. So we'll just make our type happy and we'll say post is an array of post meta. Cool. And then what we could do is we could basically create a UL and we could map each of the posts into an LI and we could show the post.title here. It's going to freak out. It wants a key probably, so we'll say the title should be unique. The slug should also be unique, so why don't we use the slug? And let's come here, refresh, and it's now working. It's showing us the titles of our posts. So we're making some progress. This doesn't look great yet. Why don't we create a little component that will show these more nicely, and it will allow us to link into each of the posts. So what I'm actually going to do is I've sort of defined where I want to create this articles component. So instead of doing this, what we're going to just do is we're going to say articles, and we're going to pass the posts in here. Its type isn't happy yet, so we're going to go into components, articles here. I can uncomment that because post meta does exist now. So we can say we want to receive posts, and these will be an array of post meta. And now I can do the same thing I was sort of working on above. We can say posts.map each post to an li. And the key on this will be post.slug. And now we got to figure out basically what to put inside each one. So we're going to start with basically just the title. And I'm going to put this inside of a div for now. And we'll say post.title. Let's see how we're looking. Okay, so each post here in the title. Now I've actually done like very minimal styling inside of this articles module where I basically styled the list itself, each li in it, and I created one for the title. So we can come back and we can just give this a class name of styles.title. Basically made it slightly bigger. And we want to make these links. So we're going to put in a link component around the title. And link requires an href. So where are we going to link to? We're going to link to /posts and then the slug of the post. So posts and then the post.slug is where it's going to link to. So if I come back, now this is a link that takes us to /post/swr /post/reduce. And we haven't built out this page yet, but that's where we'll get to in a second. But for now, I just want to basically add two more parts to this. So the first part is just to show the excerpt. So we're going to use a P, and in here we're going to show the post.excerpt. And did I have a class for excerpt? I did not. So it's looking beautiful. And then below the excerpt, I want to put another P where I'm going to show the tags. And I did have a class for tags. It's just called tags. So we'll give this a class name of styles.tags. And in here, because there's many tags, we need to map them. So we're going to say post.tags.map each tag. And each tag is going to be a link. And the link will have a key of just whatever the tag is. And its text will be whatever the tag is as well. And we need to tell it where to take the user when they click. So the href will be /tags and then the tag. So save that, come back, and we now have hooks, which I haven't built yet, JavaScript, React, and this will show you only the articles that have that tag. So we've built out the home page. Now we need to click in and build the actual details page for each post. So the code for each post lives inside of pages, posts, slug. Slug being the dynamic part that would be like SWR, reduce, or whatever you've named your blog post. And this may seem overwhelming, like how many imports do you need in this file? This is insanity. And yeah, it is a little bit insane, but we're going to walk through and talk about what each one does, because there's a lot that goes on in this file. We're basically taking this Markdown file and we're parsing it and applying a bunch of plugins to it to get code highlighting, to get auto-linking headings, and Yeah, so I think it will be interesting. And we're going to start with sort of that same function we used on the home page, get static props, because we're building these pages statically at build time. So we're going to say export const get static props, and this one we're applying a type of get static props, and it will be an async function that receives the params. Now params in this case gives us all of the information from here. So the SWR gives us the actual slug. So what we're going to do is basically put that slug into a variable. So we'll say const slug is equal to params, just like this. And now it's going to say slug can be anything. We don't want it to be anything. We want it to basically know that it's a string. So we're going to say as slug is a string, just to give it a type hint so that it knows sort of what it's working with. Now the next thing we can do, because we have the slug, is go call this same function get post from slug, and that will give us the two things, the content of our post and then all of its metadata. So we're going to call that function passing in a slug, and you can see that this is still sort of angry, and it's because we need to return an object that has props that get passed down to our component. So you can see the red went away, but we have quite a bit of work to do. So the next thing we need to do is basically take this content, which is just sort of a string of Markdown, and we need to basically convert it into something that will show H1s and paragraphs and lists and anything we've put inside of our actual Markdown. But what we're using for Markdown is this thing called MDX, remember, which allows us to embed different React components inside of our Markdown. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a variable called MDX source. And we're going to get that by calling await serialize. And into serialize, we need to pass the content. So we're going to pass that in there. Cool. And why don't we see what we get back? MDX source. So I'm going to go to the browser. Oops. Okay, what did I do? Okay. So anytime you use get static props where it can be dynamic, you also need to provide get static paths, which basically gives it a list of, hey, here are all the possible options you have to work with. So let's go build that quickly. It's actually pretty easy to do based on the get slugs function that we did previously. So we're just going to say export const get static paths, and the type for that is get static paths, and that will be async. Cool. So what we need to do is basically build up an array where each array has params, and then in our case we want a slug like SWR. So we want sort of to end up building this, something that looks like this. So keep that in mind for now, and what we're going to do is we're going to put that into a variable called, these are all of the paths you're going to be visiting for all of the different static pages. So we'll call get slugs, which will return us an array of strings. We're going to map each of those slugs, and we're going to basically build out this params slug like that. Cool. So I can get rid of this for now, and we can return an object that has the paths and also fallback false. What does fallback false means? It basically means don't try to go generate this page on the fly dynamically if they visit a page that doesn't exist, because in this case all of the pages that can exist will already exist, so we don't need to do anything dynamically. So with this in place, we can come back, refresh, and it still doesn't show anything yet, but if we go here, we basically see all of this MDX source. So it's a whole bunch of JavaScript don't worry, you don't need to know what to do with it really. We're going to be working with a component called MDX remote that basically receives this source and knows what to do with it. So what we're going to do here is we want to basically pass this MDX source as a prop to our component. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, you're going to get a post, and the post is going to have two things. It's going to have the source, which would be MDX source, and it's also going to have all of the metadata, this data right here. So we're going to save that, and we need to make these props available to here. So here we are going to say it's going to receive a post, and what will a post be? A post is basically two things. It's the MDX source and the meta. Now instead of writing this all out, what I'm going to do is just create a little type here. So interface, we'll call it MDX post, and it's going to have the source from MDX, and that type is sort of crazy. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually just copy that like that, and we will also have the meta, and meta is the post meta that we've imported from our API file. So with this in place, we'll say this is an MDX post. And now what are we going to do with this post? Well, the first thing we can do is we could just show the title in this h1. So post.meta.title, and we'll put the same thing inside of our actual title tag in the head. And let's see if it's showing up. Cool. How does SWR work? It's displaying. It's also showing up in the title up here. So far things are working. And below the H1 is where we want to use this MDX remote component. So MDX remote, it's going to be a self-closing one, and it wants to receive basically the source. But the way you pass it in, you basically say spread in the post.source like that. So that's all you have to do. Come back, and now we've got all of our Markdown showing up on the page. But there's a couple things missing. The first thing is it's not showing that YouTube video that should have been displayed here. The second thing is that it's not highlighting any of our source code. So we can go fix those two things up right now. And why don't we take care of YouTube first? So what we can do is basically pass in to this component, hey, here are all of the React components you can expect to receive and you should be prepared to render out. So what we can do is we can say, okay, components, it's an object of the components. So we're going to pass in this YouTube one. And we're also going to pass in image from Next.js, just like this. So if I come and refresh, awesome, we've got the YouTube video showing up, but we still haven't, we don't have our code being highlighted correctly. So to do this, we are going to basically pass in some options when we're serializing our Markdown content. And they get passed in with MDX options. And one of the options you can pass in is rehype plugins. And this will be an array of plugins. So rehype is what it uses sort of underneath, behind the scenes to do all of the parsing of your Markdown. And rehype comes with probably 100 plugins you can use. Let me just rehype plugins, search for it. You'll get a huge list of all of these things. Render math inline, minify the HTML, syntax highlighting, code blocks with Prism, parse the tree, compile to React. There's a ton of things you can do in here, sanitize HTML. So we're going to be working with a few of them today. And the ones we're working with are rehype slug. And what this does is it basically allows each of your headings, your H2, your H3, your H1s, to have a slug that will be sort of attached as an ID. So we'll add that one first, rehype slug, and you just pass them in like this. And then the second one we're going to be doing is rehype auto link headings. Rehype auto link headings. And this one we have to pass some options to, so you actually pass it as an array where the function is first, and then you can pass in the options. And we're going to tell this one that it's behavior, American spelling, is to wrap a link around the headings. So let's go take a look back here, refresh, and you can see that all of the headings, they change colors because that's the color I have given to links. Now they're all linkable. What does that allow you to do? It allows you to link to a heading, which adds the ID here, and then if you share this page, it will take the user right to that specific section. So that's the sort of power you can get with all of these rehype plugins. But maybe the coolest one is the next one, is to use rehype highlight, just like that. So what does rehype highlight do? It basically applies all of the changes needed for Highlight.js to do code highlighting to code blocks. So I'm going to refresh this, and all of the different code blocks I have are now highlighted as code. So how does that work? Well, let's go take a look at here. Let's go down here. Here we have a code block that outputs JSX. So here's the code in here. So if we were to sort of look at the source, and then we come here in where we find code, we can see that it took our code and it basically wrapped a whole bunch of spans and stuff around it. And it gave each of these spans a class name, HLJS keyword, HLJS string, HLJS tag, and all of those class names on their own do nothing. So if we come back here and we comment out the styles, refresh it, it's got nothing. But you can then apply sort of a theme to it by importing some CSS. So I'm importing Highlight.js styles Atom1 dark, and that brings in the CSS that will apply these colors to each of our code blocks. So in a pretty quick period of time, we've gone from basically outputting nothing to outputting Markdown to then working with the custom React components that MDX allows us to do, and then applying some rehype plugins to link the headings and to highlight code. And if we want an example of another one that works, I've got inside of the reduce one, I believe I'm using the image component. So image component comes from Next.js itself. I'm allowed to use it because I passed it in as one of the components that can be used. And what this will allow me to do is basically show an image in my Markdown file using the image component from Next.js, which allows me to have responsive images. And if we were hosting our images somewhere that Next.js supports, it would automatically go and grab them correctly. And let me just show you here. So this is coming from /images reduce, and that comes from public images reduce.jpg. So this image here that I just sort of grabbed off the internet to show in this video here. If we go to the actual reduce article, you can see the image showing up right here. All right. The last thing we want to do is basically build out these tag pages. So when we click on hooks, we want to just see the blog posts that have the tag hook. The tag page lives at pages, tags, and then slug. And we need to do something similar to what we did for each post, where we use getStaticPaths and getStaticProps together to basically build out statically each page for each tag. So we need to start by defining getStaticProps. So that would be export const getStaticProps, and that is type of getStaticProps. And it is an arrow function, and we can make it async, that is going to return the props that get passed to each tag page. So just to start with, we're actually going to return an object that has props as an empty object for now. And the reason we're going to do that is because if you don't sort of build them at the same time together, what you end up with is a page that looks like this, that says you need to build the buddy function, the getStaticPaths that goes along with getStaticProps. So we're going to work on that now. Const getStaticPaths. GetStaticPaths is the type, and it's an async function that needs to return an object that has the paths. And we're going to start as an empty array, and we're going to say fallback false, because we don't want it to do anything dynamically if it can't find the page. It should just be a 404. So we need to basically find all of the tags, but we need to do it in a way that only returns them once. To start though, we're just going to get the posts using this function here, getAllPosts, that we built out in SRC API. So getAllPosts. And then from the posts, we can grab the tags. Now to do that, we'll do mapping of the post, and each post will give us the meta tags. And let's take a look at what's inside of this variable. Just like that. We'll go to the console in a second. No, I think we have to refresh. Okay, that's 404 is fine at this point. So what we see is an array of arrays, just like that. So each article will give us its tags, but we don't want an array of arrays. We want just one single level of array with all of the strings of the tags. So we can easily convert by just calling flat on this. So if we were to come back to here, scroll down to the bottom, now we just get sort of the flattened list of tags. So we can get rid of this example, but we still have a problem here. You can see that JavaScript shows up twice. So we need to figure out a way to get rid of the duplicates. And we can use a different data type called a set for that. So a set works like new set, and you can just pass in an array to that. So we'll do this. And a set basically makes sure that each value only shows up one time. So if we go to the console and go down to the bottom, we now have a set that looks like this. So you can see that it removed JavaScript that was showing up twice. So we're looking pretty good now, but we need to take this set and basically convert that into an array of paths. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to set up a variable called paths, and we want to map the tags. But if you try to map tags, which is a set, you're going to see, let's just try. We'll see tags.map, and each tag we'll just say is a tag for now. You can see TypeScript right away tells you, hey, you cannot map a set. That's fine. We need to convert the set back into an array. And you can do that by saying array.from, and it works with a set. That will give you an array that you can then map. But what we want to end up producing is basically each one will be an object, and the object will have params, and then the slug will be the tag. So with that in place, we can take a look at the data that we're getting. And that is perfect. That's what we want to end up with. Let me just paste it here. So we want to have an array where each element is an object that has params, and the params is basically the slug that we should be generating a page for. So I'm going to clean up this code and return paths here rather than an empty array, just like that. So this function should be good to go, but we then need to come back to this one, and we need to receive the params, so we can do that. And then from the params, we can grab out the slug. So we can say const slug is equal to params, but we'll just give it a type hint here. So we'll say expect to see a slug, which is a string. So with the slug, what do we want to do now? We basically want to use the slug to find all of the posts that have that tag in it. So if we were to receive JavaScript as the slug, we need to go through each of the posts here and find the ones that have JavaScript, which is all of them in this case. So let me just get rid of this. and we'll come back here and we're going to basically get the posts. So we're going to start with all of the posts, just like this. And now we're going to use a function called filter, which will allow us to only return the posts that end up being true. And so what are they being true to? We want to check if basically the post.meta.tags includes the slug that we're trying to build a page for. So that will filter out only the posts that have this tag specifically. So once that is the case, we should have posts here, and we want to return this now in the props to pass the data to this page here. So what we can do is we can just take the props, and we want to, in this case, we only need access to the meta of each one, and we also want to pass down the slug as well so that it can sort of display it in the H1. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, pass the slug on down, and for the posts, we only want the meta of the posts, so we'll say post.map, and for each post, just get me the meta, like that. So now we're receiving two props to our component. So we can say here, expect to receive a slug and posts. And to type this, we'll say a slug is going to be a string, and posts will be an array of post meta, like that. So it's sort of complaining because I've redeclared this here. We can delete that now. It's no longer needed. And if we come back to the page, refresh, we should see tag hook shows up, so it knows. We could say, what was another one? JavaScript. It shows up here. If we visit sort of random, 404, because this one doesn't exist. So we'll go back to JavaScript. Cool. And we already built out this articles component that's used on the home page. So we could just reuse that same one. So we'll click in here. I've already imported it, so we can just throw this here, articles, and then articles wants to receive posts. I probably could have done better with my naming, like why does an article receive posts? That doesn't make sense. Why not call them the same thing everywhere, either articles everywhere or posts everywhere? Don't sort of mix and match. My bad. So we're going to pass in posts like this, and come back, and now it's showing all of the ones that have JavaScript. So if I click inside arrays, now we only see this one, and we can click in and see the actual article here as well. Hope you enjoyed this video. All you would need to do is deploy this out to Vercel now. You know what? I think it only takes a minute. Why don't we do that? So I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to commit these changes, finished blog, and push them up to GitHub, which I already have it. So now I can go to Vercel, and what we could do is we could say new project, and this is the one I just created, next blog. So we'll say import and deploy. And because there's nothing special going on here, it's going to take a minute to build out, run checks, and deploy. So I'll fast forward, but we should see this deployed website that contains this blog. All right, so along the way, the build actually failed. I wasn't expecting this because I hadn't actually tried to deploy this code yet. So why don't we go and try to figure it out? So the error that we're finding is failed to compile, and it says error, single quote can be escaped, and it says React no escaped entities is the ESLint check, but there's a way to disable this, and I'm actually going to disable this because this is sort of coming from my Markdown, so I'm fine with the entities not being perfectly escaped. I suppose I could try to figure out how to use a rehype plugin to fix this, but I'm going to try to disable the error instead. So what I want to do, it looks like, is create a .eslint.rc file. So we'll go back to our code, and it doesn't look like, oh, looks like I do have this. So extends next core web vitals. So what I want to do is is extend next instead. I think, we'll see. And then we'll go to the rules. And the rules we want is no unescaped entities. Actually, they have it as an example. So we'll paste this here. We will commit this. Adding ESLint rule for unescaped entities. Oh boy. We cannot push this up with this big D. That would be catastrophic. So we're going to push this again. This will kick off a build on Vercel. But because this has never successfully built before, you have to go back and try again. So we're going to re-import the next blog, and we're going to try to deploy this. It says it already exists. Please use a new name. So I lied to you. We need to find next blog. And it's already trying to build this out. So we'll wait for a sec. Hopefully it will pass this time, and then we'll move on. So it looks like it's going to work this time, and the output from Vercel is pretty cool because we can see what are the different pages it's going to be building. And here we can see that the posts page will have two different pages, so SWR and reduce. It takes about half a second to build each one. The bigger articles take slightly longer to build. And we also have one page for each of the tags that we have. So it looks like there's about 6 tags that we have in here. And it's just about done. It's just running some checks and assigning domains. So as soon as this completes, we can go visit the website. Let's try it out. And here we go. We're live. We've got how does SWR work with this embedded YouTube component. Is this the one that had the image? No, that one was reduce. Loaded in the image as well. Everything's working. And there's actually one thing I wanted to cover now. Something important with a blog is SEO. So we've done static building, which will help with SEO because page times will be really quick. But there should also be a sitemap. So if I go to sitemap.xml, you can see that I have one. So we're going to quickly look at how this sitemap got built. And because I didn't really have to do too much, I already had it into the project. But it's built, and this will help Google sort of crawl your website and find all of the pages correctly. So the only thing you need to do to get a sitemap building is to add in the package next sitemap. Once you've done that, you need to add a post build step to your scripts. So after it's finished building, run next sitemap. And then the way next sitemap works is if you don't have to sort of dynamically handle any pages, it just looks at what are all of the different static pages that exist inside of this Next.js app. I will create a sitemap for all of those pages. So you would obviously have to change what domain is this site living at. So put in sort of leehalliday.com or whatever your name is or where your blog is building. And then I think you could even leave this off, but what I've told it is to generate a robots file and basically to just have one policy where every user agent is allowed to visit every page on the website. So if you would actually go to robots.txt, this is the robots file that it was talking about. Now remember, you would have to, once you fix the host, it will generate this in the right with the right URL, and it tells it also where the sitemap will be living, which is the one we just visited. So that's how you get sitemaps onto your Next.js blog. Now we are officially done. Thanks for sticking with me. I know this was a long video, but if you follow it through or go take a look at the source code and then just tweak it, you'll now have a blog, and you're at the beginning of those 3 sort of benefits. You've built this out and you've gained some knowledge along the way of how Markdown works, how static site generation works, Next.js works. But you're also going to be sharing your knowledge with others, and in doing so, you'll be learning along the way as you sort of research and write content. And then just putting your name out there will help you as you apply for your next job.